Hi everyone, my name is Haley Schattschneider. Welcome to this video where I'm going to talk through how I recorded one of my latest singles. I had this idea to kind of talk through this because this specific recording is very different from how I typically record things. I'm usually in the studio and work with like a rhythm section that's all tracking at the same time, and then from there do overdubs and whatnot. And on this particular song, that was not the case at all. None of the musicians were ever in the room together. The producer wasn't in the same room as the musicians. And so I kind of wanted to walk through this to just show that music can still have a really, really awesome and creative outcome, even when you're not working in the traditional studio setting. So the song that we're going to be kind of walking through today is an acoustic version of Fly Me to the Moon. I'm sure all of you have heard it. It's a very popular song. It was on my debut album, and I had done a version that was like full orchestra with big band, a very, very long and massive sounding version of the song. And so the 1-year anniversary of the album happened this past July, and I had the idea to take one of the songs from the album and break it down and do it in more of an acoustic style. And so that's what we did. And I, at this point, doing jazz gigs, I can't count the number of times that I've done Fly Me to the Moon. And so I was just kind of out of ideas. And I'm also not super familiar with the style of like gypsy jazz, French cafe, acoustic. Like that's not really my typical vibe. I normally just like self-produce or, bring in different arrangers to help co-produce stuff with me. But on this one, I just handed the reins over to Haun and had him produce this track for me. Yeah, I just kind of want to walk through the process. I am so proud of how this turned out. It's honestly one of my most favorite singles that I've ever released. I think it just has a really unique sound. And like I said, none of the musicians were ever in the room together. They were never in the room with the producer. The only person that was ever actually in the room with Wayne was me when we did my vocal. So a very, very unique process, and I just kind of want to pull up my Pro Tools session and walk through how we did this, just to kind of show that like no matter where you are in the world, it is possible to communicate with musicians and get tracks that can produce the sound that you're looking for. So what I'm going to show you first here is a voice note that Wayne sent. So this is just him kind of laying out his ideas. Like I said, since none of the musicians were in the room together, all I needed was kind of a guideline from him in terms of, where he wanted it to go. And then he sent me a Nashville numbers chart, which I'll insert on the screen here if you've never seen one of those. And so I had a tracking day where my bass player was already in the studio, so I asked him to stay over a couple minutes. I played the voice memo for him, showed him the chart, and from there we recorded bass. So this is the voice memo.
Hey there, let's pay homage to Frank on this. Let's go with kind of his feel, his tempo, and even the intro, but instead of drums, obviously, we have acoustic. So have whoever's doing the acoustic pull those stops, where they strum on the strings without notes. And maybe the fiddle can do this, on the 3. Da, 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 fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. Another word, da, da, da. Another word, baby, kiss me. If the bass wants to, he can approach it a couple of different ways. He can start walking at section A, or he can make it a little more, I do an archtop guitar on this. I wouldn't do regular acoustic. And you might even do banjo. Archtop, banjo, and fiddle. And let the bass just go, dum, dum, do, dum, do, da, all that. And then at B section, let him start da ba doom doom ba doo da doom ba doom ba. Maybe give it a little scene change there and let the bass start walking in B. Instrumental, I repeated it. So you can either let fiddle take the melody the first time, and the second time just kind of do ad-lib jazzy stuff. Or you can split it, let the guitar take it and the fiddle, or vice versa. And then, of course, section C, the vocals back in. In other words, please be true. In other words, in other words. And then, I love, and then that you. Just like Frank does there. Except, of course, you know, the guitar does that stop again. That makes it acoustic. I didn't go crazy on chords just because it's acoustic. So it's hard for a acoustic guitar to do all that big stuff. But it's still going to be very cool.
So yeah, pretty clear. He, you know, kind of lays out, you know, directions, but doesn't get too specific. And, you know, you heard him even say, you know, the bass can approach it a couple different ways. So let's go ahead and pull in from that first day kind of what things sounded like when we were in the studio. So this is just going to be bass and then a scratch vocal and a click track. So here's, obviously we've got our click track that we record to in the studio. Sounds like that. I'm going to mute it just for the sake of not hearing it. But here's what we had. This is just upright bass and the scratch vocal. Fly me to the moon. Let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song. So yeah, that's what we kind of had. That's just a little overview of what we had that first day in the studio. It was just vocals and bass. And bass player, his name is Mauldin. He is awesome. We went to Belmont together. And he's played on almost all of my recordings, I believe, for the last year and a half or so. So moving on next, the next rhythmic element would be this archtop in banjo that we had alluded to. So I'm going to add those in. So this is Joel Key. He is an incredible session guitarist here in Nashville. He's just the best. So what I did was I sent him that scratch vocal, the bass, the click track, Wayne's note, and the number chart. And so I kind of just let him do his thing. And so he did both the archtop and banjo. And as you can see here, he's kind of sectioned out to this banjo solo as its own thing. And, you know, when we had communicated back and forth, he had said, I don't know if you'll want to keep this or what, since he knew there was going to be a fiddle feature on it. But yeah, let's just kind of add that in and show what we're working with here.
A 2, a 1, 2, 3.
There's those stops. Fly me to the moon. Let me play. Archtop. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words. Go ahead and kind of skip up to this banjo solo that he did. So here you'll hear we kind of have more of a rhythmic banjo part going with this. Pretty cool. Let's hear what it sounds like all together. I love this part. Ugh, I mean, come on. That's Joel Key. Joel Key, everyone. Also, best hang ever. Love getting to chat with him when we work together in the studio. But this particular overdub, again, I just sent him the materials and he did this from his home. So yeah, that's where we were at after Joel added his magic. And then kind of the last piece of the puzzle here besides the vocal is the fiddle. And this is Andy Leftwich. And he is an absolute icon. And you're going to hear why. He is incredible. And so he also did this from his home studio. I've actually met him once, very, very briefly, in real life. But you're going to hear he's just awesome. So let's just kind of roll a little bit of this so you can hear. Fly me to the moon. Let me play. I'm going to actually skip ahead here to the solo. That is Andy Leftwich, everyone. So incredible. And yes, if you're wondering, I still do pinch myself every day that I get to work with these guys. And again, you know, even though none of us were in the room together, I really think that solo section especially just shows these musicians are so incredible at listening and communicating in just such a musical way. So could not be happier with how all of this has turned out. Again, I think, you know, that little section there, just the way that I'm sure Andy spent some time with it and just figured out, you know, how to make all this work together. Ah, so cool. From there, you know, as you have heard my scratch vocal. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I... And that scratch vocal, that's just something, you know, we're tracking. I sit in the control room, you know, because I did that scratch vocal the day that we did the bass, actually at a studio. The bass was, you know, out in the live room and I was in the control room just kind of sitting in a corner doing a scratch vocal just on, you know, like an SM7B. Yeah, so that's not, you know, obviously not a final vocal, but kind of gives the musicians something to work with as they're, you know, laying their tracks down. But you'll hear, you know, just kind of how all of this words, in other words, I love you. So that's kind of, you know, my final vocal doesn't feel super different from that, but it definitely has a very different energy. So I'm going to pull in these stems. So these are the final mixed stems. Mixing engineer on this, her name is Leah Schattschneider. Yes, she is my sister. And yes, she is the best ever. So after we had done all of those overdubs, really the last thing to do was to do my vocal. And so, like I said, Wayne and I actually did that together in the studio. Leah engineered it, and that was really like the first time, you know, besides the day that we tracked the bass, where there was like multiple minds working on this song at once. I'll give you just a little taste of this. This is the final vocal, edited and all of that stuff. But this is kind of where we ended, and the energy on the vocal. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are pretty cool. Love how that vocal turned out. And again, that was so the direction of Wayne. I have sang this song one too many times, and I had nothing left to give this creatively. So yeah, let's just kind of take a listen here to how this all turned out. You'll hear too, one of my favorite parts is Wayne actually had me add some little ad-libs in that instrumental section. But how fun is that? Love it. So yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. Let's give this little baby a listen down just so you can kind of hear how it all came together. Again, these are final, you know, fully processed, fully mixed stems that I'm showing you here. That's why you see now, you know, bass only has one track, banjo is condensed to one track. But let's just give this baby a listen down. Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. is it. So I appreciate all of you guys watching this video today. Like I said, this was a little bit different for me. Normally I'm just sharing kind of finished product, music videos, audio, all of that. But I thought this was super fun to kind of just walk through this all, and if this is something that's interesting, let me know, because I can also walk through sessions that are the full orchestra, full big band kind of stuff. When I moved to Nashville almost 7 years ago, that's crazy to say, I was so intrigued by the recording industry and how things were done here in Nashville. And over the last 5-ish years, I've been working, you know, doing my artist stuff, doing various freelance things as a singer, but also working heavily as a production manager. And so I'm just like, I light up when I see how all this comes together. I love talking about this stuff. I'd love to talk about it all day. I'm not a mixing engineer. I'm not a recording engineer. I know enough to get me by, but I really admire the process a lot. So thank you again for watching. If there's anything else that I should dive into next, drop a comment, and I hope to see you soon.